Why are there so many podcasts about Tottenham? Do I want to know why? They might contain insight, but mostly delusions. If I hear one more, I might die. They don't like Levy and they don't like Enoch. They pine for Moo and Conte. Someday we'll like 'em, old Tottenham Hotspur.
Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of Poddenham Podspur, the Spurs podcast about Spurs podcasts. Today I'm joined by two special guests to talk about the current state of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club and especially its fan base. You know, we're 2 months out from the greatest moment in Spurs' modern history, but we've also experienced the kind of worst league campaign in generations and recently said goodbye to our talisman and captain. And so we're going to talk today a little bit about whether Spurs fans are overly positive, overly negative, and maybe why. So I'll throw it out to my two guests to introduce themselves, where they come from a Spurs perspective. And I'd like them both to share their most petty complaint about Tottenham Hotspur if they feel up to it. Which one of you boys wants to go first?
I'll kick off. I'm Matt. I'm on COYSky as at radicals dash or hyphen roots. And I'm happy to join you in. I think this is going to be a good conversation. I'm in Nashville. My Spurs story began in the fall of 2009. I was at a Council of Foreign Affairs or Council of Foreign Relations dinner, and the brother of Christopher Dodd, and I can't remember his name for the life, who spent 30 plus years in foreign service, said, if you really want to connect with the local population, the thing that you have to do in almost any part of the world is know the football culture, understand the football culture, because if you really ingrain yourself in that culture, you're going to be given an opportunity to start either a really good conversation or an argument with everybody from a taxi cab driver to the president. And he was right. And that was just a month or so before I went over to do my graduate studies at the University of Kent. So I got over there and figured it was time for me to pick a Premier League team. And I didn't want to pick a ringer. You know, I knew plenty of people who were Arsenal fans. I knew plenty of people who were, United fans. But I also didn't want to mess with having to deal with relegation. So I wanted something that was kind of safely 8 to, call it 14-ish, table-wise. And Tottenham really fit that bill. So that's kind of where I kicked off. In terms of petty complaints, that's an interesting wording to that question. I have many complaints in my relatively short history of Spurs fandom, but I wouldn't necessarily call any of them petty. So we can jump into some of our bigger thoughts, here momentarily. But from a pettiness perspective, I try to let the small stuff go. Like there's lots of big stuff. Let's talk there, but pettiness not so much.
No, I think that's pretty healthy. I mean, my petty complaint, as we were talking about before we started recording, is that I hate the look of social media posts and artwork designed by Spurs. It looks so ugly. The colors are awful. The way that the words bleed into one another, and that's the type of stuff that kind of does get under my skin. And I think that what you've said there about not letting the small stuff get to you isn't universal across everybody. And so this is when we're talking online with each other, something that sometimes gets forgotten. You got people like me who are seeing, a match day graphic and they're going, God, it's so awful. And it's ruined my day. And there's somebody else who's just, just parked it over outside of their brain. I'm going to throw it over to our second guest to introduce himself. Throw it over to you, Mark.
Hey, yeah, my name's Mark. I am originally from England, from Harlow, Essex. I moved to Sacramento 22 and a half years ago. I started supporting Tottenham in about 81. My dad was Arsenal, my brother's Arsenal, but my best friend at the time was Tottenham. My uncle bought me a Tottenham mug for Christmas, and Glenn Hoddle happened to live like 5 minutes down the road too, and he was a bit of a hero. So Tottenham stuck with me, and I was always a little bit different, I think, at times anyway, at that age. Was known for being a little bit cantankerous, so Tottenham was the one for me, basically. With regards to pettiness, yeah, there's a lot. I think one thing that I really didn't like was when we came out with that shirt actually about a month ago that said Spursy on it. I just really didn't like the club trying to make money out of that shit. I don't like fans saying it. It's ludicrous at the end of the day. Everybody has bad luck. We didn't trademark it. It doesn't always happen to us, and we've proven that. And I just don't think we should be wearing it at this point either. We're looking to move away from that.
That's a top tier complaint, I have to say. When I saw that t-shirt too, I was like, what the hell are we doing? It's not even a cool looking t-shirt. It's just
No, cheap font.
yeah, tiny.
Yep. So there was so much more they could have pulled out.
It's fascinating though, because I think that part of I actually do kind of appreciate the club wanted to take ownership of the term that the rest of the fandom in the Premier League seems to be pointed towards us, right? You know, oh, Dr. Tottenham, oh, there's Spursy, oh, there's no way they'll win in a final. That Spursy moniker, I think, is something that it annoys the hell out of me. It annoys the hell out of me, but at the same time, like, it's hard to argue with the recent realities of, being a Tottenham fan. So the club saying, hey, let's own that is, I think, a very fascinating approach to kind of getting it into the past, particularly after winning a European title.
I'd love to be on the fly on the wall of those conversations to decide to roll with it. And whether or not this has been something in their minds for a while, and they were just waiting for a cup win, or there was, or maybe I'm just thinking too deeply about it.
Or maybe I'm thinking way more deeper than that, and I'm thinking this is Vinay. He probably had something to do with that North London song too. Like, this isn't a good thing.
Yeah. You think he's trying to control the narrative so early?
Yeah.
So this is an interesting topic, because one of the questions I had for you guys was whether you think negativity is a recurring theme among Tottenham Hotspur fans. And so we're talking about Spursy and the perception of it from others. But, what do we think of ourselves? Do we think that we're a particularly negative fan base? Part of the reason we're talking and having this conversation is because the sentiment online, I look on Reddit, I look on Bluesky, and there's a lot of people who are kind of losing their ass over missing out on Morgan Gibbs-White, or not replacing Sonny, or not replacing Matters. And just the general tone of everything seems to be incredibly negative. Myself included. I'm not immune to this. But do you think it's a recurring theme, or just something that's much more of the moment?
I definitely think it's a recurring theme. I think you can probably map out most transfer windows in this way. I think just for now, I think we went into this window more positive, but I think some of the events that have happened around this window have really not helped either. Like, obviously the Gibbs White situation was a complete curveball. Nobody expected that. No other club's gone through that, right? And then there's Son leaving now too. That's just soured everyone's mood. Everyone's sad to see him go. And then, I mean, shit, I wasn't ready to see him run onto a pitch for LA yet, and suddenly he was doing that last night. It was like another kick in the bollocks. Seeing that, we're all still raw. I think that's definitely adding to the pot. And then Maddison getting injured as well. But funnily enough, I took a look at where we're at last summer, and we're pretty much in the same spot that we were at last summer. We just signed Solanke on August the 10th. last season. So we had only got Solanke and Gray, I think, at that point. So we're we're not in much of a different spot than we were, but obviously it's just we're expecting so much more because of the win and because of comments that have been made.
And also where we're at, like where there's work that needs to be done with the squad. But we're also seeing
A hell of a lot.
all of these signings happening elsewhere. And a phrase that keeps going through my brain is comparison is the thief of joy. We're seeing Frimpong going to Liverpool. He scored today, right? The work that Man City have done. Arsenal have gone out and sort of strengthened from already a position of strength. And here we are, scrambling to get Morgan Gibbs-White, which is a kind of... It seemed a little bit opportunistic to me. I'm sure he was top of some list we had, but whether we actually needed him at the time or not, I'm a little iffy on. A couple loan signings, an injured centre-back from Japan. It's kind of an odd transfer window for us, but we see everybody else out there having fun with their new toys, and that's what we want.
So there's definitely something there, right? It's hard watching Manchester United sign an entirely brand new and relatively talented front line. There's rumors now that they're going to continue that with moves for Oliva and moves for the goalkeeper. But it's tough when you see other teams making these big moves. Liverpool already won the league this past year, and they've basically rebuilt their entire team in one window. But to your question, it's tough for me to say in relation to other clubs' fan bases how I would rate Spurs fans in terms of negativity, or because I really truthfully don't engage much with other fan bases on social media, things like YouTube, podcasts. Every now and again, I'll catch an athletic, generalized, kind of conversation that kind of runs some course, but I don't know where to compare Spurs fan base to other fan bases generally. What I will say is that I think that there is a sense that for we're in year 8, 9, potentially even 10 of that 5-year rebuild, of the tough rebuild that we were listening to Pochettino describe, almost 10 years ago. It felt so close. It felt like we were turning a corner. It felt like this stadium was promising things that hadn't necessarily been felt in our sort of traditional spaces, in terms of bringing new players in terms of our capacity to continue to compete for the highest level of talent on the global stage. And yet we're supposed to believe simultaneously that we're in the top 10 in terms of global revenue. If that doesn't qualify you as a big club, that should be having the capacity to identify needs and solve for them, and to do it at a level with Liverpool's and the cities and the Arsenals of the league, then I don't know. I'm not sure what we're doing. And yeah, it feels like we're standing still when a lot of other folks are spinning wheels and moving further ahead of us. It felt like winning the Europa League was a sort of unifying moment for a fan base that was desperately needing a unified. And then within 2 weeks, it was again a fan base that was broken. I think kind of into tribal groups, depending on how people's feelings on Postecoglou were sort of calibrated. But there is a lot of there's a lot of very rapid sort of pendulum movements in the fan base. I jokingly responded to somebody the other day on Bluesky about, hang around for 6 days and the mood will be better. If you check in and you see everybody being sour, honestly, check in another week and see what everybody's saying, because it feels like we can have the highest highs and the lowest lows all within the same 3 week period. It's been a rough couple of weeks.
Maybe we should be forced to post once a week.
Yeah, right. I think another component of this conversation has to be the relationship between the media that we consume and our internal biases and the way that we can all suddenly be, joining a conversation globally in a way that, man, even when I first became a Spurs fan 15 years ago, you couldn't necessarily do. So, the 15 years ago, it would be very unlikely, Iain, Mark, that we would be having this conversation because there wouldn't have been that connective tissue between us on a forum like Bluesky to kind of bring us together. But Iain, one of the things that I really appreciate that you do with your podcast is kind of you've developed a sort of identification, a phylum sort of, system of identifying sort of neutral in terms of positivity, negativity, fair critique without going over the top and being emotional. Some that are a little bit more, let's call it, passionate, sometimes toxic, bordering into the toxicity space. And then others that are just, probably obnoxious the other direction, right? Where no matter what, they're going to be positive about what's happening. Hold on, if you're, it's going to get better. But we take in this media, and then we parrot what we've heard and the opinions that other people have provided us into spaces that give us a voice that we maybe haven't earned or don't deserve, right? And frankly, in the moment, it's very easy to get caught up in the initial emotion of it and say something or type something that is absurd and that you wouldn't otherwise do if you just slept on it for 2 or 3 days. Like, to your point, maybe we should just post once a week, and it shouldn't be, Saturday or Sunday afternoon, right? It should maybe be Tuesday. But yeah, I mean, that's really part of what I feel happens here is that we get kind of caught up in the overwhelming narrative that we can kind of derive from the media sources that we consume, and then they become sort of components of our communicative personalities.
I definitely feel that people pick up on phrases start to become more common, don't they? And certain terminologies, things people definitely pick up on what others are saying, and I feel like it can spiral at times as well for people. It's definitely felt that way the last couple of weeks. We're behind our rivals, and there's always this narrative about who won the window, and it's usually whoever spent the most money as well, which doesn't always mean success. But for me, it just feels like we just need to be more patient. This isn't anything new. This is what we get served up every year. Let's see where we're at the end of the window, and let's try and stay positive. Instead of it just becomes an echo chamber for a lot of people as well.
At the risk of being sort of critical of my podcast brothers, siblings, fraternity, I do think that there's kind of a rapid normalization and spread of ideas, and I'm going to focus on a positive one, but you could easily translate this through to something negative. Look at the could we jokes that came out of the fighting cock, 2 seasons ago. How quickly did that permeate through the entire fan base? Even if you weren't saying it or believing it, you were still seeing it, and someone around you was amplifying it. And so that's kind of the role that these big fan voices can have, and that can be an amazing thing when you're on an upward swing and everything's going great. But when things start to decline a bit, the voice and power that they have has such an influence on people who are looking at it on their phones, and then that attitude is hitting the journalists too, and that's coloring how they're writing their news stories. So I think there's a really interesting role for podcasts in spreading this toxicity or spreading this negativity in times like we're in now. Obviously, when the times are good, this is a good thing. And there's always been something, right? There's always been fan groups to spread. It's almost like gatekeeping. Let's not be silly. There's always been fan pressure groups. There's always been people who get together on the shelf for a beer and for a sing song. There's always been something. It's the kind of organization that the internet provides, and also the spread and the number of people that it can access. But there's been forums going back, the Glory forums going back years. There were Facebook forums for Spurs, 20 years ago. Like, it's not necessarily a new thing. It's much more connected now. But that's only because more people are using their phones and their laptops for kind of their socialization compared to where they used to be. But speaking of sort of journalists, pundits, podcasts, do you think they're unfairly critical of Tottenham when they talk about us?
Overwhelmingly so. I would say that the mainstream, I mentioned The Athletic, there are some others, Tifo, I like the material that they put out. But when they gather sort of the sort of intelligentsia from the media that covers the Premier League broadly, even the guys that are supposed to be covering Tottenham, they don't ever. It feels like they're so close to understanding, and yet so far from producing something that is meaningful in other words, last year, when all of the sort of memes that came out about Ange Postecoglou, like now, right? When you get a 3-pass combination that beats City or Arsenal for a goal, naive high line. What's he doing? These sort of things were permeating throughout the broader media landscape last year, and even the year before. I would say post Chelsea match, 2 years ago, where we were playing 8 people on the midway line. But it was frustrating because simultaneously, if you looked at what we were dealing with without having a professional center back on the team that was healthy, there wasn't another circumstance where those critiques would have been levied on other teams and managers. Obviously, I can't prove that, but it always feels like the other teams are being given the benefit of the doubt. Arsenal had a couple of players go down, after Christmas, and they were suddenly dealing with an injury crisis where we had 8 of 11 starters out of the lineup, and you wouldn't get that type of reporting from the mainstream media in the football space. So it's frustrating. Yeah, I think overwhelmingly there's a bias against Tottenham.
I think like we all get within the fan bases, I think it's the same in the media. We're like an easy hit for a lot of people. Everybody else likes to take a shot at us, so when you get the chance, take a shot at Tottenham too. It felt like last season though. They were okay. There was still a few sensible people around that kind of understood where we were at and what we were going through. But then I think after a while, after Ange started getting a bit prickly with the media, I think they all generally started to sort of turn on him and turn on us a little bit too. That's just my way I saw it.
The comments about Spurs and where we sit in the footballing world goes back years. Look at in Bruges, we always like to reference the famous purgatory quote, but that was how long ago? It's not necessarily a new thing, but it is almost like a meme, like before memes were a word that we were using in popular lexicon. But there's an undercurrent of English people who want to have a dig at Tottenham. We have more London rivals than anybody else will have, where somehow everybody's most hated or second most hated team. So when you get a big group of people together, they just want to have a dig at us, whether they're at the Darts or whether they're at Glastonbury or Butlins or somewhere else. They're quite happy to get together and use as their rallying point, sticking the boot in on Tottenham.
We're something that brings them all together.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a common point. But do you think we is it too much to say that we maybe internalize a little bit of that ourselves as Spurs fans and use it as a defense mechanism? If we're already upfront and facing these negative points about ourselves, like, it can't hurt us as much if we're admitting it and talking about it ourselves. Is that too much of a stretch?
I don't know. I just like to be. I try really hard to just be honest and open about everything. Even if it's a rival, if someone's scored a good goal, or they've got a great player, I just try and be adult about it, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I try not to be that way, but it gets all of us at some point. Even if it's just fleetingly, it gets us, right?
It's funny because going back some, I always felt Spurs fans were the dreamers. We were the people who always felt that we could do something.
Yeah.
And just to give you some data to back that up, it is Poddenham after all. If it wouldn't be Poddenham if I weren't throwing out some statistics. I found this really interesting analysis by a betting firm called, oh god, I'm going to miss their name now. It's like Pinnacle or something. Yeah, Pinnacle. And they took all of the subreddits dedicated to Premier League clubs last year and did a sentiment analysis on them for whether or not they were positive comments, negative comments, or neutral comments. And the article that I found, which was published in northwestlondoner.co.uk, highlighted how Spurs fans were amongst the whiniest in the Premier League. And yet, lo and behold, if you sort these comments by negative comments, there we are, number 2 behind Aston Villa last year. So that's kind of interesting. But, and then Man City were 3rd, which, again, makes sense based upon the season they had with Rodri out and whatnot. But the burying the lead here, because the other story is we are 5th for most positive comments too. So not only are we making very sort of frequently negative statements, about 1 in 5 of the comments on r/COYS are negative, but over 1/3 of them, 2/5 are positive. We are a fan base, it seems, of extremes, at least when we choose to talk about ourselves online. We are, I think, 2nd or 3rd for the neutral comments, lowest neutral comments. So this is something that doesn't really get talked about. Everyone, at the moment we're focusing on the negativity, but we're an incredibly positive fan base also about ourselves.
The thing, though, is interesting in that those are some very interesting numbers. I had to leave Twitter X because it became, and I don't know if this was algorithmically driven or whether it was, sort of the temperature in the room coming out of I left almost a year ago. But it became harder and harder for me to have genuine back and forth and have real thoughtful conversations with other Spurs fans on Twitter, and a lot easier for me to get engaged in sort of a, just immature, bad faith, name calling type of situation. And I just went, I don't know if Bluesky is going to be any better, but I've got to get off of Twitter. It was negative. It was really negatively affecting my sort of view of, Spurs fandom, frankly. And it is different on Bluesky. At least my experience on Bluesky is that I have surrounded myself with a good community, you two both included, right? And so I can simultaneously believe that we are one of the most negative and one of the most positive. It's a little bit like what I was saying earlier, where that pendulum swings pretty rapidly, and we can all probably point at ourselves and say, I've been guilty of that. There were times, in this past couple of years where we would lose 2 or 3 matches and then win 2 or 3 in a row. And then suddenly my entire mood changed, switched. We're not neutral. Who was the most, it was Aston Villa was the most negative. Is that what you said?
Yeah, Aston Villa.
And the most positive? Who's the most positive? That's fascinating.
It's funny. There's 2 ways of looking at it. The most positive, the least negative would be Bournemouth. Okay. The most positive is Manchester United.
Wow. Yeah. I would not have guessed that. I would not have guessed that.
which
Yeah.
gives me some pause as to the quality of the data. But betting firms tend to be pretty good about their data.
Sure.
Well, it might have something to do with the number of users from each fan base too.
Yeah, it's percentages, so it should be normalized. But totally agree.
Yeah.
Crystal Palace was second. I would also point out that there were some weird dates on this. It was like August 16th to May 12th, so it was before the Europa League final,
Hmm.
which
Interesting.
I think is very important.
I would be willing to lay money on it that most of those negative comments from our fan base included the word Levy in it.
This is an interesting point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Hmm.
Who's to blame for the negativity? Let's not focus on whether or not there are we are more negative or less negative than other fan bases, but the sources of negativity within the fan base. Where do you think it comes from? You bring up Levy, and he's a lightning rod. Do you want to talk to that a little bit?
I mean, he's just to blame for everything for most people. For a lot of people now, it just doesn't matter. All roads lead back to him in some way, shape, or form. But other than that, I think it's just a culmination of how a lot of the fans feel, and then how the media plays up to how our fans feel. Places like Talk Radio and they've got people on there just queuing up to slaughter us and criticize us. It's everywhere. So I think they're the main culprits for me, I would say.
It's interesting. Is what are the sources? Well, I think some of it might be the evolving nature of the sport itself, right? At the Premier League level, the role of money in the sport is, I would say, very difficult to understand because I'm not clear if you can sell your women's team as an asset. I'm not clear if you can sign 8-year contracts for your 22-year-old star that you brought in. I'm not clear if a release clause is actually a release clause. And a lot of this is the same problem that you have with things like VAR, where it's like, if there was just some consistency and everybody felt like they were playing from the same, program, then maybe there would be a lot less confusion, consternation, flat out anger at some of the things that you see happening. But it almost feels like, and this is to connect it back to Levy here, it almost feels like Levy made a set of assumptions about what a new stadium was going to do in terms of our revenue generation and what the framework of things like PSR were going to do to spending writ large in the Premier League, right? Throttling teams like City and the newer City version of City, which is Newcastle, and limiting the amount of money that they could bring in from their ownership source, in the petrol state space. But it doesn't feel as though those assumptions that Levy may have based some of his business decisions on 5-10 years ago have come to fruition, right? It doesn't feel like we're seeing penalization for breaking the rules, unless you happen to be, Leicester?
Nottingham Forest, very briefly, but that was when they were at the bottom of the table.
Right. And, some of the things for me is that it's just, I'm confused. Like the Morgan Gibbs White thing upsets me, not because we didn't get the player. It upsets me because I thought a release clause was a release clause. And if you meet it, that should be the end of the conversation. And suddenly that didn't happen. So I'm just, some of it's confusion.
I mean, we live in an increasingly complex world, and I think that all that sort of sports fandom is just a kind of almost like a petri dish of like wider culture. And so things are increasingly more confusing. We have, large language models, which, it's almost impossible to wrap your brain around like how they work, even if you work on them. But you're talking about financial complexity, about rules changing and new technologies coming into the space. So all of these things are sort of leading and piling up frustrations. And I think the problem for Spurs fans is that we're like, I made the purgatory comment earlier, but we are in the modern years, skirting between really, really, really fucking good, but not quite good enough to enjoy the full fruits of that excellence. We are a team that should have won things during Pochettino. I just want to come back though to the stadium. It's worth remembering that when we started the process of looking to build a new stadium at White Hart Lane, that was 15 years ago. That was pre-Pochettino. That was post-Redknapp. So yeah, we were just getting into the Champions League a little bit. We had some superstars, absolutely, but we weren't quite the club we were by the end of the decade. And I do constantly come back to thinking, Levy just got caught flat-footed in terms of keeping pace with the growth and all the good work he had done. He just wasn't able to do the other good work to maximize the benefits he brought to the club. Because, I look at Leeds, I look at Forest, I look at other sort of teams that had success. Everton even almost flirted with relegation. Spurs from the 90s could have got relegated a couple times. Like we were not fun to watch. We were not fun to support. We needed Jurgen Klinsmann to come back and save us one year. I'm very grateful for everything that Levy has done for this football club. I am just rueful that he wasn't able to maximize all of the good work he put into us.
Well, I think he's made good decisions off the pitch, but he hasn't made good decisions on it, and that's where we're struggling.
Yeah.
I know we're talking about Pochettino's rebuild, but really by now we should be virtually done with players that played for Jose at this point. We've still got this big churn going on. We still haven't right-sized ourselves. And then also to add to the equation, something we have done really well is we've brought on a really good crop of youngsters who are kind of almost knocking at the door. So we've got a lot of players to send out on loan now as well. We are sort of growing in slowly but surely, but it's just not quite. I think the changes of management and the refreshing of the squad is where we've really struggled. I think that's one of the biggest problems.
I wanted to piggyback on that a little bit. There's two thoughts here from me. The first is that, live by the corporate, structure, die by the corporate structure, kind of. Tottenham, I think, has benefited, and from a business perspective, has benefited greatly from the sort of tightly run corporate culture that seems to permeate the club. That's great for business. I'm not clear that it's great for a football organization. All right. So that's the one side. There's a downside to it. The other is that the communication has just been terrible. And there isn't a good excuse for that, except at some level, I feel kind of like they just seem to not think that they owe the fandom, the people buying the jerseys and buying the season tickets and making the trips, across the Atlantic to come and spend money at the stadium. They don't owe us any explanations. And I think that is absolutely wrong. And if that's the perspective from the board and the ownership group, then that's, there's no excuse for that.
I think it's important for football fans to recognize that football clubs have moved from being sort of community organizations to big businesses. But what we need to do is fight that. And that should be our role. Is voicing the concern, is pulling them back into and keeping hold of our, the community benefits that football clubs and what they represent to us. We may live in America, but what it means to the people who live in North London and the surrounding areas is huge. And they also are encouraging us to develop and grow little communities based around Spurs worldwide in the supporters club movements. So we absolutely need to recognize, yes, things are changing, and it's not always a good thing that it's changing, and we need to keep our voice in play before we lose it entirely. So I value some of the fan groups that are out there doing that. So sorry to butt in.
No. I think, I think that's good. The thing that I would go back to with communication there is that if you're not being absolutely clear about your intentions, like I really feel like, to something Mark said, like we should have, I think both of you said this, we should have won something during Pochettino's run. You think about that team in, 16, 17, 18, that team was amazing. And there really is no excuse for not winning something. We came very close to winning both the league and the Champions League. And each and every open window, it felt like we were one or two kind of premier signings away from having the ability to go out there and really compete everywhere. And it didn't happen. And in fact, it was kind of the opposite, right? When a club doesn't control the communication and manage the communication to a degree that's that's not just meeting the expectations of the fan base, but exceeding it, I think, to a very large degree, you end up in circumstances where rank and file fans of that club are saying things like, well, maybe Levy cares more about finishing fourth than he does about winning trophies. Or, which I don't necessarily think is true. I think Levy, you could see on his face when he was walking through the line in Bilbao last season, how ecstatic he was in that moment to be winning something, to finally have brought the trophy drought to an end. But, the actions don't seem to be aligning with the desires, at least in terms of, feeding the fans' expectations there. And they need to do a better job of setting the expectations. There's been no consistency. One of the arguments that I think a lot of people that were pro Postecoglou would lay out there is that, good or bad, unless you allow a program to become what it should be or can be, you don't really know. I don't know what changes he would have brought to the club for season 3, and we never will. But now there's a new identity. There's a new manager. There's a new structure in place. There's new tactics. We're being told to expect this, this, and this. And it's every 18 months that same thing is occurring, and it feels like whiplash. It really can feel like you never get a chance to just settle in and go, okay, I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to expect from this team this year. If we add this piece or this piece, then maybe it'll be a little bit better. A lot of other teams do, I think.
I think we're still building towards that, though. We're still getting there. We've got a lot of young players that got a hell of a lot of great experience last season that we should expect to be better this season. We got players like Odebear that was out injured last season that he's going to be like a new player. Tell as well. I think one of the things too is when we get in these situations where we're up there with the big boys and we're trading blows with them, we suddenly expect us to be exactly like them too financially, and we're not.
No.
We're always going to be us, and it's always going to be a bit of an uphill battle until hopefully we can build some stronger foundations and finally build off of that like we nearly did in 2019.
It's funny because people, you can talk about where we are now versus 2019, 2018, and whether we've slipped or not. I do feel like this season should be a bit of a free hit. We just won a major trophy. Whatever happens next year, as long as it isn't relegation, like we've still got like an absolutely incredible, thing to look back on. We've got this free hit to look forward to. But I feel like, here we go. I feel like Spurs fans are sort of permanently stuck in the past. And I think Jack Pitt-Brooks spoke about this, is that we're always talking back to like the 2019 Cup final and whether or not the Europa League would be able to like wash us free of that within the fan base. And there is an awful lot of backward gazing. We're entering in a new chapter. Yes, we've lost Sonny. Yes, we've lost Postecoglou. But we've got a lot of young, cool players that we've signed or are growing. We've got a new manager with new tactics and new ideas. And like I said, we've got a new era as European champions. It's something to look forward to, but we just collectively, and this isn't everybody, just don't seem to be able to do it. It's permanently looking back to what was. And I feel like, again, it's that comparison being the thief of joy. That's kind of my big statement about that.
Then we end up getting we always do this, we always do that, right? We always do this because of that looking back, and that permeates and becomes like our thing. And another another stick for our fans to beat us with,
Yeah, it's like
beat the club with.
it's like catastrophizing, right? Well, like I know what Levy's going to do. I know what it's like. Everyone right now, post Morgan Gibbs White. I know what's happening right now. We're not going to sign another player. We're not. We don't have a plan B. We don't have a list. We're a professional
Yeah.
football club. We absolutely have a list. It's just that these are humans on the other end of the deal who may or may not want to come to Tottenham for a litany of reasons.
How many loans did we nail last week?
Yeah.
That must have taken some work, right?
I think the Morgan Gibbs White and that whole saga exposed a really raw nerve within our fan base.
Let me say, how shocking was it in that one day to get the transfer for Kudus finished, and then later that day hear that tomorrow there was going to be a medical for Morgan Gibbs White, and you get these two, $50 to $60 million players in one basically news cycle, both getting announced to the club. It freaked me out, not because I was, because it was so different from what I've come to expect from a summer transfer window for Tottenham. Let me ask you guys both this question, and I think I kind of know what the answer is going to be. But do you think that given the injuries, given the transfers that we know of, just as we sit today, that we're positioned to be a better, more competitive squad just in the league, all other things being equal, from a talent standpoint that we can put on the pitch week in and week out in the Premier League? Are we better this year than we were last?
Yes, I think so. Just due to the progression of the youngsters, I think we're definitely going to be more solid than we were last year. I think people should be a hell of a lot happier with Kevin Danso than they are, because he's been absolutely fantastic since coming in
I agree.
and given us a hell of a lot more strength in our defence. I think maybe, like other people have said, there may be a lot of draws this year. We might have a few 0-0s this year. But also, with any new manager, I think it's going to take us probably till November, December for everything to really start coming together with the way that Thomas Frank wants us to play. It took a while for Pochettino to get us going, and I'd expect the same with him. It's just how well we do between now and then, and how patient the fan base are. If there's glimmers of good performances, and then we'll be fine, and everybody will be happy.
I think people forget how rough that start to Pochettino's era was. It wasn't fun, and it didn't look like it was going to work out. Again, we always do this. Was creeping in. It's just another guy like AVB, some young guy. Why aren't we getting an experienced manager, etc., etc. I think, Matt, that we are potentially in the same place as we were, depending on number 10. But here's the thing. I don't think we were as bad as our position last year.
Right.
So purely by not losing as many games, we'll be in a better place in the Premier League than we were last season, which, if we can't get worse, we'll get relegated. My bold prediction for the year is if shit hits the fan, we're spending a lot of money in January. We're not too big to fail, but I feel like if we are slipping towards that type of season again, there'll be changes that will come in quick, and there'll be money spent to correct that. But yeah, I think generally speaking, I'm positive going into the new season. I think that Wednesday is a free hit. We saw what Crystal Palace did today with Liverpool in the Community Shield, winning on penalties. I think that the difference between PSG and us is possibly greater than between Palace and Liverpool. Matt's pulling a face, but maybe that's just me being negative again. But we have a fighting chance to get a ball hasn't been kicked yet, and a lot of Spurs fans have already decided what's going to happen in that game. Which again is, you come back to signings too. We do this before guys even kick a ball for us. A lot of Spurs fans have decided what our squad needs, and are therefore pissed off because we haven't signed the player that they've identified. We've talked to we've heard,
or somebody else identified, and they'd never heard of the name before, but now they want them.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I've never heard of this guy until about 20 minutes ago, but now I don't know what I'll do if we don't sign him.
Oh yeah,
Levy better not F this up.
Nico Paz. Right. Nico Paz, that's my new one.
You're right.
Yep,
never,
there you go.
never heard of him until this week. But if we don't sign him, I'm gonna be getting on a plane to N17. You know,
One of the best young attacking mids in the world. Come on.
yeah. But you know, it's the same
Mhm.
thing. But the tacticos in the sort of podcast space, they do a great job of identifying what they think are our tactical issues. But if Spurs signings don't align perfectly with what they think we need, then it's, you know, all hell breaks loose. Spurs are
Well, I always told you. I've been telling you, right?
yeah,
I
exactly.
told you this.
Exactly. And but
Yeah.
that's their prerogative. You know, they're there to get attention, to help the fan base sort of understand how Spurs works to a certain extent, but also get paid.
And you know what? This is an important point. I will tell you that I think there's, to a certain degree, there is more clicks and views and listens when I think there's more in the negativity. There's more to be found in the negativity than there is in getting a group of people on together and have everybody go, you know what? It's not as bad as as the broader population may have you believe. You know, I really enjoyed the conversation between Prof and Oso Spurs. You know, and that's one of the more positive sort of. It's not that there's no critique of the team of the club and organization, but it's that it's always in good faith, and I think that that's important to differentiate. But yeah, I mean, I think look, I agree with you in that from a positional standpoint, there were a lot of factors last season that led us to be 17th. I think when you identify one one tournament over and prioritize one tournament over the Premier League as an opportunity to get back into Europe next season, then you're really putting all your chips into the middle of the table, and it ended up working. That won't probably happen again. We're probably not going to lose, you know, basically every senior player on our first team next season.
I'm looking for some wood to knock on, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, sure, that's right. You know, but there will be ups and downs, and it's important to recognize that if you're really not happy right now, check in about 2 weeks and just see, you know, because I think broadly, while it's easy to compare ourselves to the Chelseas and the even Uniteds this season, and I mean, God, it seems like United won the Europa League, doesn't it? But it's easy to compare ourselves to the remainder of what would be considered the top or the big six. But also, I go back to the thought about why I chose Spurs to begin with. I'm pretty lucky that year in and year out, I don't have to really think, man, I'm going to have to figure out a way to watch Spurs matches because they've gotten relegated this season, or there's any real threat of that. I've gone my entire Spurs supporting life without having to think about that in any serious sense. And I would expect that that's going to continue to be the way that we enjoy Tottenham as a fan base moving forward.
So I'm mindful of this whole conversation potentially of being, you know, obviously focused on the negative. That was why we got together to chat. But I want to round out with a couple questions. The first of which is, what's the antidote to negativity within the fan base? Matt just mentioned Podspur and voices like that. But Mark, what do you look to keep yourself positive when you're engaging with Spurs and Spurs fans online?
I think I just try and remember where I was and where I'm at. You know, when we first come into this, you didn't know what went on behind the scenes at the club. You just knew what happened on the pitch. You knew from a newspaper report. You knew from somebody who went to the game. Now we know so much, and I just try and take it back to what I fell in love with at first, which is what happened on the pitch, and just be excited for players coming in and to see what they can do, and try and remove some of that baggage and not worry about that so much. It can be difficult, but that's generally what I try and do.
I think that's a really important point, that when everything else around you is shifting in a direction that you don't enjoy, you look for your own internal and put the energy into yourself. You look for your own internal regulation. Matt, what about you? What's your antidote to negativity?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this. The first is that, you know, be better on your own, right? So if you look at a fan base, or you look, if you get online, if you're chronically online and you're seeing and feeling negativity, don't feed back into that. Try and be maybe a stopgap against some of that negativity. Say, there are great people on Blue Sky that will say, hey, here were some of the positives that came out of, what would otherwise be considered a dreadful outing in the Allianz Stadium. But try and be the difference, that you want to see, right? That's the first thing. I know that can be a little bit cliche, whatever, if you can't say something nice or at least something fair, don't say anything. The other thing I would say is that consider always that we don't have any idea what the other person is dealing with, right? Sometimes the negativity that you feel or sense or read or hear isn't about anything to do with Tottenham, but maybe they slept weird and have a hurt neck, and maybe they're getting yelled at work, and maybe there's a pile of dishes in the sink, and who knows, right? Try to be fair to everyone and expect, I would say, other folks to be fair to you. And that, I think, is what the sort of foundational components of a good community should and can be.
Yeah, I think that finding your people would be my point, to piggyback off what you were saying. It does annoy me, though, that when people are trying to be better, when people like Prof or Positive Spurs or whoever are out there spreading what they want to do, what they want to say in the world, that people come in and tell them no, they can't feel like that. Like, no, you can't be positive about Postecoglou because we're 17th. Well, that if you're the other person, please don't post. But if you're the person who's putting that out into the world, and I need to be better about this, it's you don't have to respond.
That's it. Yeah, you can choose block early, block often,
or just ignore it,
or just ignore it. I would say if you really give it, look, there's going to be a certain percentage of any population that's just going to be fully off the reservation. You know what I mean? When you encounter those folks, if you allow them to drag you into what their emotional space is, it's not going to help. You're not going to win the argument. You're not going to convince anybody. It's not going to be a fair, or reasonable debate. It's just going to turn ugly, and you're not going to feel better at the end of that exchange, almost for sure. So just don't play that game, and maybe put your phone down and go outside.
I'm mindful of people using data in different ways, and I got into an argument with somebody who I enjoy talking to on Blue Sky about this like 6 months ago. And we're all using the same data, right? We're all using where Spurs are in the league, how players are nominally performing, how the club makes us feel is probably the intangible that most changes from person to person. But we're all making our own decisions, all right? And we're all kind of believing our own bullshit. And so when you're talking to somebody else, they haven't just magicked up an opinion out of thin air. They've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and you're not going to convince them that they're wrong in one post on Blue Sky or Twitter or Reddit or wherever. And that's okay. If you want to have a discussion, that's fine. But the other person doesn't have to believe you and have to come over to your side of things after you've had a conversation with them. Not everything is a war that you have to win, and that's difficult because sports fandom is based around competitiveness because you want to win football matches.
What was your expectations line? Yeah. Well,
I enjoyed
I
that.
can predict that I can accurately predict you're not going to change their opinion. And you probably shouldn't expect that. So, that there's a setting there going into that exchange that, just be reasonable. It's okay to disagree. You can do that without offending anyone, I think.
Yeah.
It's actually quite satisfying to get two sentences into responding to someone and then suddenly stopping and deleting all of it and backing away and just not responding at all. I quite enjoy that. I've done that a few times. You're just like, you know what? Let's leave it right here.
I feel very grown up when I do that. When I start deleting.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I think people can do is create stuff and be the joy you want to spread in the world. You know, Mark, through his account, shared a whole bunch of stickers with a bunch of Bluesky people by drawing, you know, pictures of their favorite Spurs players. And it's just such a fun little thing for us to do together and remember what we have in common rather than what's different about us. Because realistically, we're just losing our shit over 22 dudes kicking a leather football around a pitch, you know, miles away. Let's find the fun.
Who are increasingly younger than we are.
Younger and healthier, yeah.
I've got an 18-year-old that lives rent free in my house right now, and I will tell you, it's wild seeing the maturity of players like Bergvall and thinking like, what? When I was 18, I couldn't, I could barely find my way to school every day, like barely.
Yeah.
And this dude manages to be, a pretty complete footballer and part of a global organization. It's pretty impressive, frankly.
Well,
So
keeping his head in the last minute of a first leg semi-final against Liverpool and slotting the ball past the keeper.
right.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that at that age.
I wouldn't mind doing that at 40.
There's a possibility
Right.
I could do that at any age.
Exactly.
I recognize this.
I think that, again, credit to the club for their scouting. Like, we don't often give them props and credit them where good things happen, but I think the scouting of young players and their temperament, Archie, Lucas, I think that speaks to that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I would include Papsar. I would include Udogi. I would include Odebear. I'd include Tell. I mean, the list can go on and on. We've got an incredibly good, Kinski. We've got an incredibly good spine. Van de Ven is young, Spence is young.
And they've got to work together. That's again credit to the club. And I wish we saw people give credit to the club when it's due, because we certainly give them kickings when they've earned it. But things like that, getting a group of young men together to bond and gel and become a team is difficult. So, that's something to be called out. All right, let's end with a message to the Spurs fan base. If you could, magically communicate into the brain of every single person who identified as a Tottenham Hotspur fan worldwide, what would you tell them? Mark, do you want to go first?
I'd say if we can go injury free, or at least half of the injuries that we had last season, we're going to be in pretty good shape, I feel. I mean, you got to remember that our back four, back five now with Danso too. If they can all stay fit, this will be their third season together. They should damn well be good as well. And I just think we're just going to get better as the season goes on, and we're going to find our new superstars. And I don't think the transfer windows, I don't necessarily think it's going to be a bomber that everybody thinks about, but I think we're going to make some good signings still. I'm positive about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, my message to every Spurs fan globally would simply be: enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride. It's it's going to be May again soon, and May is going to turn into next May, is going to turn into the May after that, and just enjoy it. It's a long season, but it goes fast. Enjoy it.
Yeah, no other fan base gets to experience the highs and lows we do. Well, maybe we don't get the relegation, but within a safe high and low, they just don't get it. They don't get it. They're not Spurs. They're not us. That's why so many of them hate us. And keep your chin up, I think. All right. Well, thank you both. Where can people find you online? If you want to be found, of course.
My Bluesky handle's RomVDV. I can't remember what the rest of it is, but yeah, that's my name on there.
Yeah, I'm also on Bluesky. I think still as the visible hand at roots-radicals at Bluesky.
No, thank you both. This was a good chat. You know, it's a tough conversation to talk about without slipping into negativity yourself. You know, because you have to address it and then discuss it and dissect it. But I hope we did a good job, and I hope people value and enjoy it. So again, thank you both for coming on. I hope to have you on in the future. If the listeners enjoyed what they heard, drop us a like, a comment. You can find us on every podcast platform. You can find us on social media on Bluesky at Poddenham Podspur.bsky.social, and keep making and listening to Spurs podcasts, and have a wonderful day and be positive.